in Wales are on the waiting list for a transplant at any one time. Mark was waiting for 4.5 years. In the end, he felt he had no option but to try and buy an organ.
I didn't think it was going to happen, so it was sort of, this was my last roll of the dice, really.
But the transplant he wanted in the Philippines was called off at the last minute because the organ wasn't a suitable match. Mark and his wife Jane had to give up and return to Wales, back to a life on the transplant waiting list.
I am going to get it. I will get it. Even if I'm 75 years old and I'm over here, I will have a bloody transplant, I am telling you.
7 months later, Mark did get the call he'd been waiting for. A kidney and fresh hope had been found. The transplant was successful, but despite that, Mark has been warned it will fail in future, and he may have to go back on the waiting list.
You know, you always live, even when you've got one, you always live with the fact that it's not going to last forever. You know, you can sometimes get so close to your situation that you think everybody else's is not as hard or as tough as yours. There's people in I know there's people in worse positions. I'm not sitting there, but sometimes you got to feel sorry for yourself. Sometimes.
Mark believes the proposed opt-out system will give him a better chance of an organ in future. If the law is changed, it could be introduced in 3 years. Opt-out isn't a new idea, but why change now?
There is a chronic shortage of organs available for transplantation, so we believe to introduce a soft opt-out system now is the right way forward.
What are the benefits of taking this approach?
The benefits are that we hope that it will increase the amount of organs available for transplantation. In other countries that have introduced this legislation, there's been an increase in the amount of donors receiving organs, so this is the way that we think we should now go in Wales.
But in 2008, a Welsh Assembly inquiry into organ donation came to the conclusion that the system the government now wants to introduce wouldn't work. An all-party committee was chaired by former AM Jonathan Morgan.
When we started the inquiry, I was quite open to the idea that a change in the law could make quite a significant difference, that perhaps there were problems in the legislation that we could deal with that would actually allow Wales to go its own way and do something better and show the rest of the UK that something different could be done. But my view changed quite slowly but surely over the period of the inquiry. And in particular when we went to Spain and examined the system there. What we found when we visited Madrid, although the law changed in 1979, nothing really altered in the rate of organ donation until 1989. This change came about not because the law was changed, but because 10 years later, after seeing no improvement, the Spanish government decided to invest in transplantation, in coordination, in training and recruitment, and that made the biggest difference.
A UK government task force said that the question of opt-out should only be revisited if the number of deceased donations had not increased to 50% by 2013. In Wales, the current figure is 49%, almost meeting the target. So if donor rates are already increasing, is a change in the system necessary?
Anecdotally, I would have said that the overall view is this is not going to make a huge difference.
Consultant John Saunders is chair of the Organ Donation Committee at Neville Hall Hospital in Abergavenny.
There are a few naysayers who really think it will make things worse, and there's one or two enthusiasts who really do believe it could deliver. My anxieties are, because we're going to have an opt-in register continuing as well as the opt-out register, this creates confusion in the public mind. Despite efforts to inform, it will invite confusion, and that this will lead to lower donation rates. And if there is a single example of somebody from whom organs are taken despite having opted out, a single case like that could cause enormous damage to the whole programme.
Under the new law, doctors will have the legal right to take an organ. But what if the families of potential donors disagree?
Families, do they have the right to say that, no, you can't have my relative's organ?
Families don't have a legal veto. However, if they...
Well, to put it another way, they don't have the right to say no.
They don't have a legal veto. As I've said, clinicians have a duty of care.
So they don't have the right to say no.
They don't have a legal veto.
Which is, to answer my point, they don't have the absolute right to say no.
They don't have a legal veto.
Right. Which may mean that you could leave yourself open to sort of legal action in future.
Obviously, there are lots of legal issues. There are lots of lawyers working on this. We have the competence to bring this bill forward, and that's what we will be doing.
What this means is that doctors will have the legal right to take organs, but in reality, clinicians say they will abide by the family's wishes. What is clear is that the proposals raise many ethical and legal dilemmas. The anticipation of life to come is always a big part of turning 18. But for Mitchell Powell from Swansea, this is a particularly poignant celebration. Born with a life-threatening heart condition, he had open-heart surgery 3 times by the time he was 15. And there have been days when he didn't think he'd live to see this one.
I think my first 2 open-heart surgery, I was too young to really think of the, the consequences or the risks of the surgery. And after my last open-heart surgery, when I was told I needed one, I was 14, and I remember there planning my own funeral, what song is going to be there, I'm going to be, if I was going to be buried in a Swansea City kit, and just little things like that. I honestly thought it was going to be the end of it. Because of my heart condition, I've always had something in my mind saying that I'm not going to make it to, this age.
He's 14 and he shouldn't be talking about funerals, he should be talking about football.
Mitchell's mum, Caroline, has had to watch him endure a lifetime of hospital appointments and operations.
It's been horrendous watching him go through all the pain and suffering he has gone through.
She and his family know that he will need a heart transplant. They just don't know when, but they have to wait for his condition to deteriorate.
He's got to have less than a year to live before he's offered an heart transplant. Then comes along a fitness test to make sure he's fit enough to have a heart transplant. Plus, because you've got a lot of complications, he'd be screened as high risk. I'm sure if the organs was available, they wouldn't wait for Mitch to have less than a year to live, and risk him being too ill. He's been ill most of his life. Let's give him a chance and give him a heart now. But unfortunately, don't come down to that because there's not enough organs.
Even before the Welsh Government's organ donation inquiry in 2008, a Department of Health task force concluded that an opt-out system should not be introduced in the UK. A former chair of the British Transplant Society, Professor John Faber, gave evidence to the task force. He has concerns about the plans for Wales.
I see this as a piece of legislation that's ill-considered. It's been pushed through in the face of strong evidence that it's actually not going to do what it wants to achieve, and that it's not going to deliver the additional organs which the patients are waiting for. I think what it can create is a tension in the organ donation process, because families will feel that the state has rights over their loved one's body. And fundamentally, what the system desperately needs is trust. It desperately needs trust, and anything that potentially erodes that trust is potentially harmful.
In March, a BBC poll showed that 63% backed the proposed system. But according to a Welsh Government survey published last month, support has dropped to 49%. One of the main concerns